Good morning, everyone. My name is Glenn Silloway. I am the Social Policy Director for the League of Women Voters. I am welcoming you. I'm happy to see you here today. Today's program is titled, What is Affordable Housing and How Do We Get It? We have a great lineup today and content that you need to understand to know how the system is working now to produce affordable housing. For context, this is the second of 4 planned webinars on affordable housing. Future dates to be determined, but we'll let you know. You can find a video link to the first excellent program about why we should all care about affordable housing on our website, lwvslo.org. Before we launch, I have some housekeeping things to share. This meeting is being recorded. It will be uploaded and available in a day or two at lwvslo.org. We're also going to email the video link to registrants, and we appreciate your sharing it. Our presenters have all agreed to share their slides, and those will also be available in PDF form. We love to get your questions as we go. Submit them via the Q&A function. Chat is disabled. When the questions come up, we will be monitoring those and trying to answer as many as possible in the time allowed. There's a possibility that if something is especially pertinent, we'll answer it right at the point at the end of that presenter's talk, but typically we do take them at the end. We're scheduled to run from noon to 1 p.m., but we often have lots of good questions at the end and in the queue at the end, and we'll continue on as needed for a few minutes. We hope you can stay with us. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Shelley Higginbotham, who will be our moderator today. Shelley is the board chair of People's Self-Help Housing, one of 2 nonprofit housing development agencies in SLO County. She is the past chair of 5 Cities Homeless Coalition. Shelley served 12 years in elected office in Pismo Beach, 6 of which as mayor. No little experience there. She's also been an active member in our league. She's been a moderator of candidate forums and done a number of other things in our voter service program. So, Shelley, thank you and take it away.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm honored to be here today and participate in this webinar, and very grateful to the League for sponsoring. Especially, I think affordable housing is something that all of us are very concerned about and interested in. We are very fortunate to have 4 panelists that have a plethora of experience in affordable housing, and this is going to be a very interesting hour. We have James Worthley from SLOCOG, it's an acronym for the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments. We have Teresa McClish, who's from the Housing Development Program. She's the housing manager for the city of San Luis Obispo. We have Scott Collins, who is the executive director of HASLO, which is Housing Authority of San Luis Obispo. And we have Stephen Peck of Peck Planning and Development. So thank you all for joining us today and giving so much of your time. We really appreciate it. So with that, we're going to have a presentation from James Worthley.
Thanks, Shelley, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is James Worthley, and I am the planning director here at the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments, also known as SLOCOG. I'm here to present our efforts as they relate to housing, specifically the state process called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or its acronym pronounced RHNA. First, though, SLOCOG might not be recognizable to many of the listeners, so let me give you a little background. For those of you who aren't familiar with SLOCOG, we are a regional council and an association of local governments comprised of the 7 cities and the county. Our board has 12 elected members, 1 from each city council and all of the county supervisors. SLOCOG's prime responsibilities include transportation planning and funding for the region, while serving as a forum for the study and resolution of regional issues like housing. Regional agencies like ours plan, fund, and manage local transportation systems. And when we plan for transportation, we plan for all modes of travel. If it includes cars, buses, trains, bikes, senior shuttles, social services, transportation, and walkability, we're on the job. At this point, you might be asking yourself, what is the regional council? Regional councils, or councils of governments, or COGs, are a group of local governments that come together to work on issues that are broader than just one jurisdiction. Issues like transportation, land use, and air quality. These issues need regional solutions because they don't stop at the boundary of any one jurisdiction. Much of SLOCOG's funding comes from the federal government through our designation as a Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO for short. We also get state funding through our state designation as a Regional Transportation Planning Agency, or RTPA. With a total of 18 MPOs and 44 RTPAs in California, we're not alone. Like many of our neighboring regions, SLOCOG is responsible for coordinating, planning, and programming transportation plans and projects countywide, developing and funding strategic plans, building consensus, and connecting communities. SLOCOG has been doing regional planning in our area for over 50 years, and yet many residents still haven't heard of us, but I bet many of them know or use some of our projects that we helped fund to completion. From the highway widenings for the Cuesta Grade or Santa Maria River Bridge and State Route 46 East, to Quintana Roundabout in Morro Bay, or the Shell Beach Road streetscape in Pismo Beach, SLOCOG goes on to job. Whether you take the Pacific Surfliner for a day out of town or strap on your rollerblades to zip down the railroad safety trail, SLOCOG played a big part in delivering that project or service. You can check out what we've done in your community. The website that will connect you to our regional transportation outlet tool is on the screen, and it maps everything we've completed in the last 20 years or so, as well as future projects that are now found in our draft 2023 Regional Transportation Plan. Now, people probably know us because of the programs we offer through our regional rideshare division. Increasing traffic congestion and gas prices are issues that affect many people in the SLO region, and the SLOCOG's rideshare division and its programs work together to increase awareness and availability for transportation options and reduce costs for commuters. Now let's shift into housing. For RHNA, there are three main steps: determination, distribution, and planning. This covers a 2-year period. The RHNA does not necessarily encourage or promote growth, but rather allows communities to anticipate growth so that collectively the region can grow in ways that enhance quality of life, improve access to jobs, promote transportation mobility, and address fair share housing needs. Ooh, let me go back there. Here's some of the steps that we've gone through in the past RHNA cycle that started in 2018 and then was adopted in 2020, leading into those housing elements. So here we go backwards. The state kicks off this process every 8 years. In 2018, the State Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, worked with the Department of Finance. They developed a regional housing need determination by looking at current and future projected numbers for population by age, the number of group quarters like dormitories. Then they projected how many new homes will be needed to be built to house the growing population. They don't stop there, though. They also look at other factors and add on additional units needed based on those other factors of overcrowding, replacements, and low vacancy rates. Let's pause for a second with that. With all of the second homes and vacation rentals, it might seem like we have a high vacancy rate, and we do, but that's not what HCD looks at. They look at the percentage of homes for sale or for rent long-term. They then end up with a single number. In 2018, that number was 10,810 units as their final step. HCD considers census and American Community Surveys reported household income brackets and county median incomes, and split the single housing total number into 4 income brackets of very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. Now, HCD does share this information with SLOCOG, and they ask for our review of it. And if we see issues, we can respond to help improve upon that number. Once that determination is agreed upon, SLOCOG takes over and is responsible for divvying up the housing need amongst all of the jurisdictions. This is done by developing a distribution methodology for use in a RHNA plan. To do this, in 2018, we convened a team of local planning directors, as well as bringing in LAFCO, the Local Agency Formation Commission, and Cal Poly. We also ran it by our 2019 Regional Transportation Plan stakeholder group. that was heavily involved in reviewing and guiding development of the 2019 Regional Transportation Plan. Working with this team, we looked at varying percentages of employment and population, and we also offered varying options to include or exclude 4 large, unique employers. We then identified 9 options to distribute the units. The RHNA working team reviewed these 9 scenarios. Multiple rounds of discussions were held, ultimately landing on scenario 5, which was 75% employment-based, 25% population-based, and to exclude those unique employers in the weighting, and made a recommendation to the SLOCOG board. With the methodology in place, final units by jurisdiction and by income levels is generated. The adopted distribution methodology improves the jobs housing balance or imbalance. Now, every 8 years restarts the RHNA assessment process. Our next one will restart in 2026. And this process quantifies the need for housing by income group within each jurisdiction. The public also plays a role. A public comment period and public hearings were included and will be included in the process to select a methodology, as well as to review and provide input into the draft and final plans. SLOCOG's housing rule ends here. The RHNA is a state requirement and sets a minimum number of housing units to plan for. SLOCOG does not have the authority to approve housing developments. After that, there's a distribution methodology and plan. The local governments, or 7 cities and county, each develop their individual housing element and must identify adequate housing sites and programs to accommodate their share of RHNA for each income category over the duration of the housing element period. And that's where my expertise on the housing elements and RHNA ends. And I turn it over to Teresa McClish, and really to focus on those housing elements.
Thank you, James, very much. And I know that there will be questions about RHNA and trying to meet those RHNA numbers, and if there's any consequences to jurisdictions who don't meet those RHNA numbers. So we'll look forward to some of those questions later. So now we have Teresa McClish, who is the Housing Policy and Program Manager for the City of San Luis Obispo. Thank you, Teresa.
Hi, Shelley, and maybe you can just let me know if I'm sharing my correct screen.
We have photos, and we do have your notes. Photos are on the
Okay.
left and notes on the right.
Pardon me, I'm going to do that again.
Okay.
So funny.
There you go. Perfect.
Great, great. Thank you, and thank you, James. Just handing that off right to me. Here I am working for local government, and we have a housing element. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about pathways to housing production and affordability through the lens of local government. So James has in SLOCOG through this very integrated process hands us an obligation to meet housing needs by the state. And it's our job as a local government to take that number, that regional housing need number assigned to our jurisdiction, and make it into local policy. So we have this lovely 3,354 unit number. And what we do is we write a general plan chapter, which is our housing elements, one of the chapters in our general plan. And we describe policies and strategies and implementation measures to address those housing needs. So, and then we implement those within the assigned 8-year period. So it sounds easy. You develop policy and you implement that policy. Here's a couple examples of how you would do that through your zoning ordinances or through your financial plans. And here's our first friendly reminder that we are in a housing crisis. So this hasn't been so easy, and it hasn't worked perfectly throughout the state. Turns out, all the local governments weren't enabling production of enough housing to really meet the need statewide. And so the state has really been stepping in, and not just stepping in a little bit, they've been sitting right next to us as we're preparing our housing elements, and the certification process for our housing element has been very, very vigorous. And they have enacted lots and lots of housing legislation, and we have to address much of that within our housing elements. A couple examples here, what we're talking about today, our regional housing needs allocation plan. But in addition to that is accountability. We're working with density bonus law, and we have a lot of other recent legislations for specific to affordable housing. So our general plan housing elements, we've all been corralled now into similar cycles. So our counties all within one cycle now. We're in our 6th cycle housing element. Whenever we talk about it, it's a 6th cycle housing element because we're going to be working on the next one pretty soon. And we have to note that today's housing element, our 6th cycle housing element, is not your grandma's housing element. There's just so much more involved here with the state certification process, and rightly so, because we do have a crisis on our hands, and we do need more housing production, more streamlining, less barriers, and more accountability. So just a quick note, this is a different chapter in our general plan. It has a lot more scrutiny than any of the other general plan chapters. And nonetheless, we do have to make sure the policies and programs that we adopt within our housing element balance out with all the other general plan land use elements. So it has to balance out with your circulation element, your open space element, et cetera. And if you have optional elements in there, for your recreation or your agricultural needs, has to balance with those as well. So James showed this slide, and I've highlighted San Luis Obispo as our example today. And here's our lovely number of 3,354 units that we're planning for. Local jurisdictions also cannot build this housing ourselves. Got a nice little thing called Article 34 in the state constitution. But we need to make sure that land is allocated, that we make it feasible. And as the state's been instructing us through these RHNA obligations, remove barriers, streamline it, and increase production of housing. Really, we got to focus on, again, taking that number and making sure it makes sense within each jurisdiction, because we're all different, makes sense in terms of local policy. And we have to recognize that it's not just circling areas on a map. Housing can go there. There's a lot of different programs that need to be, enacted and implemented in order for this to make sense. Here's a slide about the housing continuum. It's not just housing production, increasing overall numbers, which is absolutely what we need. We need overall numbers in production, and part of that, an increasingly bigger part of that, needs to be housing that's affordable. We really need to look at ways we can diversify our housing types. This also comes from the state, and it also comes from common sense. We need to make sure we can look at, obviously, we've been looking at, market rental, market ownership homes. Below market rate is the affordable housing, often called below market rate home ownership. These are the essence of traditional RHNA numbers. But we also have this whole top row. We have to really look about needs of the community. We also have a homelessness crisis. And so we're including, this whole housing continuum as we look at different programs and opportunities we have. Some of the tools local governments have to enable more affordable housing are here. It's, a lot happens within our zoning ordinance. For the city of San Luis Obispo, we had a big work program in the last couple of years that included a lot of zoning amendments. For example, our inclusionary housing ordinance was updated. There's other ordinances that we have that can directly impact housing and affordable housing. For example, subdivision ordinance. We are just updating right now. I think it goes to second reading tonight. How we approach our specific plan areas, other action plans. We have our active transportation plan, for example. James talked a lot about that in terms of the connection of transportation and housing. We have our strategic plan. We just adopted our homelessness response strategic plan, really impacting, you know, how we're looking at our housing programs and administration of programs. So how we administer it, how we fund it. These are all tools of local government and how we actually can try to facilitate more affordable housing. So this is a long list. I will go through it. We don't have much time today, but this is what I've been talking about. Lots of implementation measures. So James talked about the RHNA assignments, you know, how these RHNA numbers get fairly distributed throughout local governments. This is a policy period. We really worked on our housing elements, making sure we had policy in place. For the city of San Luis Obispo, implementing that policy for the last couple of years has included lots and lots of zoning amendments. This is including, you know, making sure that we have objective design standards for qualifying projects. So by right processing, allowing more mixed uses, more residential and service and manufacturing areas, making sure our zoning ordinance accommodates supportive housing. Really making it easier for accessory dwelling units to be built. We've had over 137 units constructed last year, really a very good option for a lot of people. Streamlining development review for those projects that are less than 50 units. Again, this big inclusionary housing ordinance update was very significant. We're trying some more experimental things. Our housing element said, hey, get more small units downtown. So we adopted a flexible density ordinance to do that. There's lots of other things here. On the bottom of the slide, you'll see some funding obligations that we've made. And this is taking money, for example, that we had through the American Rescue Plan Act and putting it toward affordable housing and working with our partners such as Haslo to preserve at-risk units, for example, at the Anderson Hotel. So lots going on, and it's not just as I just really want to emphasize that a successful affordable housing program takes successful programming that balances your community's priorities. So how do we know if we're doing anything significant? Well, one way we can look is if we're growing. So thanks to the slide the Tribune put out, we can see, we're not in the negatives. So City of San Luis Obispo really needing jobs. Our community has lots of jobs, and we really need more housing. Our balance is out. That's why we got a whole bunch of those RHNA numbers. So job-rich community really need to work on that housing. And so that's what we've been doing. And at least this is one small metric to say we're doing something. Just another reminder, we're doing all this work, but this housing crisis is so challenging. And we just have to find more and more ways to really get at it in meaningful ways. And so despite some of these successes, we need to continue implementing programs. We're going to talk a little bit more about affordable housing, and I'm going to buzz through some of these slides to move on. But basically, if you're spending no more than 30% of your monthly household income on rent and utilities, you can afford that house. And if you're spending more than that, you're setting yourself up for some trouble. And so many people in our county are kind of facing that. So everybody needs to be concerned with affordable housing, but you covered that in your last webinar. For the city of San Luis Obispo and most communities, affordable housing is really deed restricted housing for certain income categories. And in San Luis Obispo and most communities, We enable the construction of that housing with our partners, for example, Haslo and People Self-Help Housing, when we collect in lieu fees with every development. And we take those fees and we leverage them by working with our housing partners, and they can compete. Scott will talk about that later. Compete for financing programs, and we can generate more units, or developers can build the units along with the developments, and that both ways are actually needed for this to all work. And then we make sure those rental units are deed restricted for 55 years and for sale units for 45 years in general. Just a quick look at what that looks like. What a monthly rent is for a 2-bedroom unit to be considered below market rate or affordable housing for the low income level. You can see all these different tiers and all these numbers change per bedroom. This is all on the city's website, similarly on the county's website. So for example, rental unit would be $1,475 for a 2-bedroom monthly rent for a low income unit. And we can look at by number of persons in the household. Again, this is all on the city's website. A 2-person household in this low income category. This is these are folks making between 50 and 80% of the average median income, and this is an income of $70,000 for qualification in this income level. Pretty significant. So we, the city of San Luis Obispo, most jurisdictions have been working on affordable housing inventory, increasing that inventory for a number of years. City of San Luis Obispo has had this inclusionary housing ordinance in place since 2001. So we have been generating a pretty good number of units. And we've just updated that inclusionary housing ordinance. This is an obligation for any developers to make sure a portion of their developments are deed restricted as affordable housing. And so we have an inventory now of over 1,300 units. And, what does this mean in terms of RHNA project progress? I mean, we've got all these programs going on. What is the state going to say about our RHNA progress? Well, we're doing okay. I think we're doing okay for this point in the RHNA cycle. We have, we're not quite halfway through it, and we're, about halfway through our RHNA goals. These are goals. We want these units to be developed to meet our housing needs. But if you look, you can see where those numbers really are generated. These are the above moderate income units. RHNA covers both affordable housing and all housing. So we're in the city of San Luis Obispo doing quite well in housing production overall, but above market rate units especially, and our affordable units are needing to be increased. So we do have a lot of project in the pipeline due to these programs that are in our housing element. So we've been working with our housing partners and developers. They've been just doing a really great job out there, housing advocates, helping community understand how important housing is. And so we have a lot of units, affordable units in the pipeline, and we're hoping to really try to meet those RHNA numbers as close as we can. And just looking ahead in the next couple of years for the city of San Luis Obispo, again, if anybody wants to know what we're doing, take our housing elements. The marching orders are there, continuing implementing those programs. For example, a couple of little things we have on our plate in the next couple of months is we're looking at a pro housing designation, a state opportunity to try to position yourself for better funding opportunities. And we're also looking at a home key grant opportunity. We're really going to delve into this missing middle program realm, and that can look a lot of different ways. We're really excited to work on that. And then we're going to take a look at our couple of our specific plan areas. So we have so much work to do, but this housing crisis really, demands that. And that's all I have. And I'm going to hand this over now to who's next.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. Your slides were great, and we have some wonderful questions that we'll be asking at the end. So next we have Scott Collins from the Housing Authority of San Luis Obispo, otherwise known as HASLO, and he's going to be talking about some of our financing opportunities. So take it away, Scott.
Yes, thank you all. And I'm excited to be here. I appreciate everybody's attention to this really important issue. I'm going to attempt to share my screen without breaking computer. And here we go. All right, it's on the wrong side, but it's everybody see it okay? I'm going to go with
It's
yes.
perfect.
All
Yeah.
right. Okay,
Thank
so I might not be looking at the camera, so I apologize for that, but I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. So before I talk about myself and more importantly, HASLO and what we're doing, I wanted to offer kind of the why we're here, at least why HASLO is here, and others who are really interested in this issue. And I want to offer a quote from the book Evicted by Matthew Desmond. If you haven't read that, I think it should be required reading for anybody who's interested in this issue, anybody who wants to understand the intersection between poverty and housing. So here it goes. It says, we have affirmed provision in old age, 12 years of education and basic nutrition to be the right of every resident because we recognize the human dignity depends on the fulfillment of these fundamental human needs. Decent, affordable housing should be a basic right for everybody in this county and country for that matter. Without shelter, everything falls apart. So safe, reliable, affordable housing provides the foundation for better educational attainment, mental well-being, better health outcomes. It allows individuals to actually participate in civic life and not just leave it to the wealthy. And it helps build a sense of community. And that's ultimately what we try to do here at HASLO. So let's see if I can move it to the next slide. So what do? We provide the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and it helps those who are of lower economic means, seniors, veterans, disabled, special needs populations, such as those who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, or those who are facing mental health issues. We're also a developer of affordable housing units, as Teresa mentioned earlier, and we manage through property management and maintenance of those facilities. And we also provide direct services to our clients and work with the myriad of amazing nonprofit service providers to connect to our clients. So housing vouchers, the U.S. Housing Urban Development, or HUD for short, provides over 3 million households, either vouchers or public housing each year. For the County of San Luis Obispo, which we represent, although I should mention that we are authorized by the City of San Luis Obispo, but over time we've taken on helping the entire county. HASLO has at its disposal 2,874 total vouchers. That's countywide. I would say the need is probably 2 to 3 times that amount, and maybe 4 times that amount for those who are actually income qualified. We go through a rigorous process to determine that for those who are interested in needing housing. And typically we're serving those who are literally from 0% income up to about 50%, but most of our folks fall under that 30% below area median income. Tenants who receive a voucher can either go find it on the private market or work with one of our projects. They pay 30% of their income, again, to meet that sort of designation of what is considered affordable. And then HASLO, through our voucher, subsidizes the remaining amount. And I must say that we are entirely dependent upon the good graces and relationships with our landlord grouping in our county, as well as the projects that a lot of people are involved in making successful. Mentioned earlier, we partner with agencies such as CAPSLA, TEMA, Five Cities Homeless Coalition, and others. I don't want to leave anybody out, but I know, well, like ECHO, Lumina, et cetera, just so many who are there on the front lines helping place people into housing. This is an income level look for the entire county. Again, we're typically helping those who are in the very low or extremely low income. It gives you a sense for the amount of money earned to make it qualify. And what we really don't have an answer for is that next level, the missing middle level up. As of today, we actually own and maintain 859 units. And again, going back to that total number of vouchers, we have 2,800 plus vouchers, of which most of these project units we have are using vouchers to make the project affordable. As Teresa mentioned in her presentation, these are deed restricted, typically for 55 years, sometimes less. We have 510 units in the pipeline, meaning some projects that have actually been entitled and have been funded or under construction. There's those who are in the entitlement phase. There's some that are already been received permits, but we're working to get funded. So that next part is really, how do you fund an affordable housing project? Typically, it requires a myriad of funding. We're very fortunate to have great partners at the City of San Luis Obispo and other areas of this county that provide direct funding, to also include our Housing Trust Fund partners. That makes our projects far more competitive when we seek tax credits, which I'll get into in the next slide. But ultimately, typically takes several years to get funding squared away before you can get into construction. That's on top of 2 years typically it takes to get entitled and all the pre-work before that. I will mention though that it is getting easier from the entitlement perspective to get projects through the pipeline. That's because of the state's intervention, understanding that years and years of NIMBYism has led to this dearth of affordable housing, plus the dissolving of the redevelopment agency in most cities, that we actually could build, as a city, you could actually build affordable housing. So the laws that have been changed to allow for projects to move forward more expeditiously has been a tremendous help, and the City of San Luis Obispo and other cities in the county have really stepped up to help where they can outside of those new laws. So as you can see, the last bullet point is really key here. We partner with the cities very closely, the county and other nonprofit developers such as People's Self-Help. So tax credits, nearly every project that we've ran through require tax credits. That few exceptions have been the Anderson Hotel, as well as our Home Key project up at Paso Robles. That was through those emergency funds. That there's still some remaining to convert motels and hotels into permanent affordable housing. But again, most of our projects go through the tax credit process. Yeah, the federal government provides up to about $9 billion of funding each year, and those are sorted out through the states. Essentially what tax credits do is it allows investors to buy into these credits, which allows them over the life of the loan to basically reduce their tax liability. So we're talking the very wealthy and corporations. And then we use those to basically lower the cost of development, which makes our projects feasible. So the challenges and limitations on that. We're tackling numerous crises at one given time right now. We have, again, 2,800 or so vouchers, of which they help supply those 850 units that we own and operate. But we have folks who are homeless. We have those who are falling into homelessness as evictions are reaching all-time levels again after all the COVID-19 restrictions or supports have been lifted. We have seniors, the boomer generation, the second half of the boomer generation, that have less and less in their savings account. And we're seeing a greater number of folks who are in that age bracket who are calling us for support, or calling our partners for support. So we're starting to see that silver tsunami where folks aren't set up really well to succeed long-term, and more we're seeing a greater aging, I guess, of the homeless population. And what Teresa mentioned earlier is the missing middle. That's your workforce, and there's really not much of a product out there to help build the missing middle, and that provides housing for your police, your firefighters, your nurses, your teachers, and the very individuals who work for me that provide mental health services, that provide substance abuse services, that do outreach to our homeless populations. If we want to actually tackle these problems, we have to have the workforce here who can, be able to live here and not have to utilize our various services to be able to live here. So those are challenges that aren't easily tackled, and they're all pointing to the limited resources that we can provide. Because vouchers are so successful, it's proven. It's the most successful anti-poverty, anti-homeless program that the federal government, the state supporting governments have ever seen. It's just we don't have enough funding. And tax credits, while they're very, very helpful in getting projects built, and then we own those assets, and then we have greater control in terms of evictions and those kind of things, and have greater success with our clients. Those tax credits are increasingly competitive. We're very fortunate if we can get one project approved a year, because we're competing against the likes of Santa Cruz and Santa Barbara and Ventura County, because they do it through a district basis. So suffice to say that we have a limited number of vouchers, and tax credits are incredibly competitive, which limits the number of units we can develop. We, along with People's Self-Help, would love to build more units that could be deed restricted and be able to serve those who are of lower means and those in the workforce levels. But a lot more funding would be required. But yeah, thank you again for listening to me, and happy to answer any questions when the time comes.
Scott, thank you very much. That was a great presentation, and we do have a number of questions, so stay tuned. Really appreciate it. Next, we have Stephen Peck, who's the president of Peck Planning and Development, and he really represents the private sector developer. And there's an awful lot of pressure on you guys to develop affordable housing coming in from jurisdictions. So we're really excited to hear about the challenges from the private industry. So thank you so much, Stephen, for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelley. I think it looks like we're loading on this. So I'm a professional planner, but most of my experience is with local developments in San Luis Obispo and some in the Central Valley. And what I'd like to do is sort of take you through what it looks like from the private development standpoint, to talk about what I think are the A's of housing: affordable, attainable, and available, what's in the local market, housing supply and economics, current housing supply miss, and how we get more. I think that's what we're all interested in. I would echo the comments from my other panelists that housing is just not a social justice issue or essential need. It's an economic imperative in San Luis Obispo County. Most should consider that 25% of all employees in the county are at one time thinking about leaving because of the unavailability of housing. It's also our most important thing we can do to address greenhouse gas emissions. So it covers a lot of needs, pushes a lot of buttons for social justice, economic sustainability, and environment. When I talk about the A's of housing, when builders talk about housing, they talk about it being available. Is there product type suitable for who is looking for housing in the marketplace? And I'm going to try and make a distinction between probably what Scott would talk about in terms of affordable, which would be deed restricted housing that's exclusively for occupancy for very low, and sometimes moderate income households, and available housing and attainable housing. Sometimes the available housing is that there's just nothing for my family in the marketplace. Maybe there are a lot of ADUs, but I've got 2 or 3 children and I need more than that. Or is it attainable? What's the initial cost? Is it in your price range? Do you have enough down payment? Do you have enough income to support the mortgage payment. And the little table just sort of summarizes what, if you simply used a 31% annual payment factor, which is what a private mortgage analyst would suggest, that the moderate income, the upper limit on that is probably in the low to mid fives. The workforce is probably in the mid sixes. And then the low income is somewhere between 275 and probably 350, depending on the number of bedrooms. The good thing is that local policy prioritized housing is actually working. If you sort of take it back to the year 2000, even 1990, the average production in the city of San Luis Obispo was about 150 units per year, about 0.5%, against a need of 250 to 275 a year. Kind of post the land use and circulation element update, it increased a little bit. There was still a need for 250 units a year. But just recently, as Teresa mentioned, there's been an uptick in the average production of over 500 units per year. And one comment to make is that those units that we were seeing on the ground right now were put into play during the 2010 housing element cycle. Developments in San Luis Obispo like Avila Ranch and San Luis Ranch, finalizing the Orcutt specific plan area. Those were all put into motion at that time. And then when the adoption of the city's land use and circulation element in 2014, they really started going so that you can see that it takes quite a while for vacant land to turn into housing. This is a slide that some may recognize from other presentations that I've made. The upper line is the housing need that's being generated by employment and enrollment at the various colleges. The dotted line is the 1% growth line, and the lower line are the actual number of building permits that were issued in any year since 2000. Kind of that grayed area is kind of the shortfall, the cumulative shortfall, which as of today, between 2000, is about 2,300 units. And over that same period, the cost of a house in San Luis Obispo has gone from $261,000 to about $992,000, a 6% annual increase. Say by comparison, food has gone up about half that amount. Incomes haven't gone up by that amount, and fuel, which we all sort of perceive as being fairly volatile, hasn't gone up by that amount either. So again, emphasizing and exacerbating that crisis. And one of the things that Teresa demonstrated in her presentation was kind of this, we're not getting a lot of moderate, kind of what I would refer to as kind of this missing middle. This was a slide I did in 2016 for the Avila Ranch project. And you can see on the left-hand side, those are units that were being done by Haslo or Peoples or other folks. And then those units on the right-hand side, those are being done by the private sector. And there was really nothing in the middle. For the moderate income, for the workforce. Fortunately, since that time, the city's done a pretty good job of actually tailoring programs that start to fill that gap, but that is still a very underserved part of the market. Developers would love to operate within this market if they could, but sometimes the cost of providing a house just doesn't allow them to offer anything at that price point. The other one thing I want to emphasize is that the housing market is more than just those new subdivisions you see out on the edge of town or even apartment buildings in the middle of town. It's a dynamic and fluid market of move-ups, people who are having children and getting a bigger house. There are move-outs, people who are coming and going. There are first-time home buyers. There are move downs, empty nesters, people who have aged, their children are gone. They're looking for something smaller. It's kind of that dynamic fluctuation that creates opportunities in the housing market. Because at the end of the day, only about 10% of housing in any one year is actually new housing production. The rest is the selling of existing homes. And about 25 to 50% of new home buyers are existing residents in the community. They're actually creating opportunities at the bottom. What we're seeing recently with the higher interest rates is that a tight housing market normally means few people are selling their homes. And so there's some freezing in the housing market today. while existing homeowners look for lower interest rates to move up or out. And one of the good things about the existing home supply is it's generally less expensive than new houses. They didn't necessarily have to meet the code requirements that you do today for whether it's for energy conservation, greenhouse gas emissions, mitigation fees, that sort of thing. So it's a good opportunity to focus those on certain housing needs. Vacancies and competition create opportunities. I think we're starting to see that now. Higher interest rates also means that some owners are sitting tight. Affordable housing, because that's part of what we're talking about, affordable housing with a big A, as part of new development is probably fairly limited. As I'm going to demonstrate in a couple of minutes, the ability of the private market to deliver lower income housing, low income housing is very, very limited. These are the costs we're seeing today in the housing market. On the left-hand side, you see R1. That's a typical single-family detached lot in probably any city. The R2, those might be small lots. The R3 is what we normally call the condos or attached units, and the R4 is what we call apartments. And you can see in the feasibility bands for the moderate income is that certainly today's R1 market can't beat that. The lower band in each one of those bars is the cost of the land. Then the black is the basically improvement cost. There's some financing costs, but that upper bar is basically what it costs to build the house. So by way of example, it costs a little bit more than $400,000 to create a single family detached lot before the house is even built. That's well above the lower income limit. And certainly once you start finishing the house, it's well above the moderate income limit. Those are primarily for well above moderate. The R2 and the R3 products tend to be able to meet the moderate income limits. Those are attached units, smaller lots. And then the R4 is about the only product type that is able to hit the lower income limit. So this area that's being outlined, that's what it costs just to create a lot without any sort of structure on it. And so you can see how kind of mismatched that is with where we need to place housing to actually meet an affordability. This is kind of the detail of that slide, you know, where all the money goes. I think the important takeaway here is that that bottom bar, that highlighted bar, is that if you were to simply write down the cost of a duplex so that a lower income household could afford it, it would be a $332,000 subsidy, direct cash subsidy. You have to reduce the cost of that down to that $604,000 unit to $272,000 in order to make it affordable, and kind of across the board. So these are the kinds of challenges that the private sector looks like as they kind of figure out, how do I accommodate as much of that in my project without and still be able to have a feasible project. So in general, it would take 8 large market rate units to pay for the subsidy on just one lower income unit in a private project. I also want to go over sort of what it looks like from, I guess, my chair when I look at a housing project. This is an actual example of a project I was involved in about 5 years ago, and it demonstrates how housing is produced. There's a land acquisition and pre-construction phase that's financed with your retirement funds like PERS and STRS and your 401k funds that are asking about 20% return on their loaned dollars. And then there's a construction phase, the actual building of the house. That's lower risk, little less interest cost on it. And each one involves some inherent risk. So in the property purchase phase, in this case, the property was purchased in early 2011. There were some closings, there were some adjustments to be made. Then it went into design, engineering and design. And by that point, the owner in this particular project was $20 million in debt after the engineering design, after property acquisition. Then with the on and off sites that were developed for the project before the first house was even built, the project had an accrued debt of about $31.5 million. And by that point, with accrued interest, it was $37.6 million. So that's kind of the hole that the project was in. And it wasn't until basically the 180th unit that the project broke even. And so the last 20 units of this 200 unit project helped it break even or even make a profit. The important point here and the takeaway is that interest carry cost at peak equity was $20,000 per day. That's why delay matters. That's why developers and builders get nervous about delays, because cycle time matters to them. For the cost of the money, timing is everything. So we should take that away as we just think about what we can improve to make costs a little bit lower. Also want to cover a couple of the, what I consider myths. Higher density and infill housing costs less. In many cases, infill housing costs more because the utilities in the street aren't necessarily set up for it. Higher density housing costs about 35 to 40% more to produce on a per square foot basis. And oftentimes in infill, we get into neighborhood NIMBY delays that will actually add the cost and the complexity to it. I think there's also an assumption that perhaps developers and builders get subsidies. They don't. Public subsidies require higher wage contracts, increasing housing production by about 50%. Scott and I compared a cost of doing an apartment, and while it would cost one of my clients maybe $225 a square foot to do an apartment complex, his costs ranged above $300 a square foot because of all the labor requirements. Density incentives such as the density bonuses help, but that's about a $25,000 to $45,000 benefit, or about 5 to 6% of the total cost, because you still have to build the house, you still have to finance the land and so forth. And that builders and developers create the need for affordable housing. This is developers and builders are feeling a need, and that the obligation to produce the affordable housing is a community-wide approach. So how do we produce more? First of all, public funding for public housing. Scott mentioned the demise of redevelopment funding for housing. That was a tremendous source, an ongoing source. It needs to be replaced. Developers and builders have limited economic capacity to build affordable housing with a big A. There are some new tools to do that, but this is an area where I think we require a lot of effort. We need to encourage housing at the top and the middle, and unfreeze the upward and downward matriculation of households out of existing housing. Be an advocate for houses, not just housing. We often talk about housing policy, but the outcome is the production of houses, units on the ground. And for all of you, make it politically safe to be pro-housing. Housing is an economic, environmental, and economic justice issue. Get to yes. Also, you get what you inspect, not what you expect. Policy plans are fine, but actual housing production is what matters. We've often said, let's stop admiring the problem and let's start solving the problem. And finally, from a builder standpoint, we need real, adequate, and available land for future development. We need a rolling 10-year supply rather than a 10-year supply that whittles down then to a 2-year supply. We also need land that is readily available to purchase and develop. There are many, many properties that are identified in various housing elements in the county that aren't for sale at any price. They may be for sale, but they may have environmental issues that will take a very long time to solve, and also to reduce cycle and permit processing time. So with that, Shelley, that's my portion of the presentation.
Stephen, thank you so much. Very informative. If I could get all of the panelists back on and unmuted. It's 1 minute to 1, but as we stated, you all offered to stay on for a few more minutes because we do have some great questions. I'm just going to start tossing some questions out to each of you, and then what we'll do as the league is some of the questions that we may not have gotten to, we will reach out to you to get answers, just to be mindful of your time. So first question, Teresa, does the Does the San Luis Obispo, the 137 ADUs, do those count towards your RENA numbers?
Half of them count. So
Okay.
that's what HCD will accept for our market area. So half of the ADUs can count toward our affordable below market rate RENA numbers.
Okay, and then kind of piggybacking on that question, somebody asked, is there some sort of a mechanism to see what an approved ADU is being used for? Is it being used as a rental? Is it being used as a short-term rental or for family? Is there any mechanism to monitor that?
No, not really. No, I mean, they're either, used as an extension of the household, or they're rented out to another household, but they're obviously on the same, they're accessory to a primary unit, so they're on the same lot as a primary unit.
Okay. Stephen, what are the most effective ways cities and counties could help make that missing middle pencil out?
I think one of the things that we're looking at now is how we can come up with better designs for higher density housing. Teresa mentioned the missing middle, and there's actually a missing middle architecture that she had a graphic of it, where maybe you have a duplex that is, each side of which is 1,100 square feet, but it looks like a house that would fit into the neighborhood. That's one thing that you can do. I think the other thing is to maintain a real and adequate supply of housing. It takes 10 years once you say, let's develop some more housing and you zone something, to the time that house gets on the ground. Unfortunately, we're kind of in a cycle now where we're kind of at the end of that land supply and it's being dried up. So there should be some dynamic mechanism where you can make sure that you always have enough housing to produce for the next iteration. My clients are always looking far enough out where I'm finishing this project, where do I start the next one? Is it a commercially zoned property with no park near it, or is it part of a master plan community? So I think just keeping on top of it. I think the other thing is, one of the things the city's doing is be a pro-housing community. We sympathize with electeds who get beat up a lot about being pro-housing. I think everybody on this call in this webinar ought to stand up and say, we're for housing, not just for social justice issues, like Scott said, but because it's necessary for the economic survival of our county. We have to stand up and say yes.
Thank you for that. James, do you know what part mobile home parks play into the housing elements and into RENA numbers?
I would probably give that one to Teresa also, because it's,
Okay,
what does the city do with it?
okay. Teresa, how about mobile home parks, and what part do they play into the housing element and RENA numbers?
And they're governed by the state directly. And in terms of our ability to count them toward our RENA numbers, they would have to be deed restricted. So if they're deed restricted homes and they're new, which we haven't really seen those lately, but if they would be new, then we would be able to count those toward our affordable housing RENA numbers. Yeah.
Okay. Scott, what if anything is being done to address farm worker housing?
Yeah, good question. I know that there's some state funding that has been made available. I think the next notice of funding opportunity, or they call it Supernova. I understand in parts of the state, you're able to achieve enough numbers, for lack of a better term, where that would be a successful project. I think sometimes we really try to mix and match so that you have a certain number of types of individuals, whether they're farm workers or homeless or senior, that you could make that work. But in our case, I don't think we've had the numbers, but I could be wrong on that. But I know it's an issue, and I know the state is putting money into that. And then it's just really being, I guess, realistic about where to locate those, because there needs to be a population. Otherwise, you could be in a situation where you build a project for one type of population and aren't enough, and you can't house that. You have vacancies, and nobody wants a situation like that. So I think it's certainly a case by case basis.
People's self-help housing has been successful in other counties as well
Right.
in building some really great projects but I won't even go there because I'm not a panelist. This can go to all of the panelists, but how is available water figured in to the RHNA numbers and housing elements? That's the big elephant in the room, even though we had wonderful rain this last year. How are we addressing that?
That's a great question, and it's not my favorite question, but
But you're going to go first. Love that.
I know. When state gives us the number, our almost 11,000 units this last cycle, they do not look at water or water restrictions at all. When we are allowed to allocate them out, then there's actually state statutes that say you can't use water or water restrictions as a mechanism to diminish those units going from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. The theory, as I was told, and it was explained to me, was that a jurisdiction that has control over their water, meaning they're offering the water services, they have the ability to increase tax or water rates and thereby find new water. Now, it is an area that I've been pushing back on with HCD and identify that water is not an issue that's within a region. This is a statewide issue, and if they can't find more water for us, how are they telling us that we need to take all these units? But again, the RHNA is a planning process, not a building process.
And I'll add, as a former city manager of Morro Bay, and knowing the players in this county, it's and city of SLO especially, a very forward-thinking region when it comes to water, and thinking about how to incorporate the growth of Cal Poly and other educational institutions, as well as growth overall in our county. And cities like Morro Bay, Pismo, and Arroyo Grande, and Grover Beach, and SLO, and others are trying to take control back by using the very resource of wastewater to convert into potable reuse and drinking water. So I would say, and also looking out to the future of desalination. So I'm very confident that this county and the various players involved, including SLOCOG, will be able to overcome that challenge.
Thank you for that.
Mhm.
There was a question, there's a lot of housing that needs to be, according to RHNA, be developed in the unincorporated areas. And there's a project on the Dana Reserve. And a question came in is the proposed project, are those houses going to be counted towards the RHNA numbers? The person that proposed the question said they didn't think so. I'm just throwing that out there to anybody that may have the answer.
I haven't heard they would not count. The first question, I think, is when does the first unit get occupied? If
Okay,
they're not occupied within the 6-cycle RHNA, they don't count to the 6-cycle RHNA because they're beyond that. So
correct. Okay.
there's a lot of work still to go on that project, I believe. We'll have houses tomorrow.
Okay. Scott, we had a question about what can people do if they have no income?
Yes, we do. We do have a number of those, particularly at our projects like Paso Home Key, where individuals may have nothing. We certainly would encourage some contribution, and we have caseworkers who help connect individuals with services like SSI, for instance, and that could help cover portions of their rent, but we don't turn people away who have no income.
Okay, thank you for that.
Mhm.
Last question, Stephen, why does high density housing infill cost more for a developer?
I would say basically two reasons. One is that the area that you're filling in probably wasn't designed for the amount of water, the power, or any of the other public service needs, or possibly even the roads. Up until about a couple of years ago, projects like that would be slammed because they would be contributing to more traffic in an infill area. That isn't a permitted requirement anymore, or a consideration under state planning law now, but it's still a concern. So I would say part of it's economic. Higher density housing simply costs more per square foot. An apartment costs about $225 a square foot to build. Probably because they're a little bit smaller, but also because they're going vertical, which costs more. There are normally common area amenities that have to be put into the cost of that. There's often a homeowners association or owners association that might cost $150 to $200 a month. I worked on a project in downtown San Luis Obispo several years ago, and by our calculation, the on and off site improvement cost, even though it was in a developed area of the city, cost 150% of what it would in kind of a greenfield environment, because the power wasn't there, the sewer wasn't adequate, the water wasn't adequate, it didn't have a fire lateral, needed fire services. So I think I simply want to make the point that it isn't always the case that putting something dense in an existing developed area is cheaper. It's also riskier if you're in a residential neighborhood that simply does not like that. And we ran into that on the 2 projects on Foothill that created quite a stir in the neighborhood, because they were, according to the neighbors, they were out of scale for the area. And so there are lawsuits, there are delays that cost money. So it's, some of it is delay, some of it's simply straight costs and improvements.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to go back to the panelists as a whole. Any final thoughts or comments? James, I'll start with you.
I'm going to say something that maybe I shouldn't. Right. Proposition 13 does a great thing in that it keeps people in their homes and they're not priced out. I get that, I understand that, it makes sense, but it does other things as well. It locks people into their homes because they can't upsize or downsize without taking on a bigger burden for that next tax 5-10 years later. If they're not moving, then people can't move into theirs to upsize or downsize either. It creates an issue. The second part of it is that when that home becomes a second home or is passed on to a second or third generation, that home becomes a rental. That rental then rents out forever, collecting less and less property tax, or not less and less, the same property tax from, let's say, the 1990s, not generating the revenues that the city can use to then improve other areas of its city to then build more new housing. There's a lot of challenges in this. One of the SLOCOG plans that we're working on right now is called the Housing and Infrastructure Plan. We've looked at a number of different housing projects, and the investments in infrastructure, water, and wastewater that are necessary to help those projects along. It's a big gap. There's about $1 billion need for water, wastewater, and infrastructure to make those housing areas efficient. And there's not enough money in the state, federal, or local budgets that come through us in our region for transportation, water, and wastewater to meet that in the coming 5 or 10 years. There's a big gap.
Thank you. Teresa.
Wow. Do I step on another third rail here? I'm not sure. Yeah, I really appreciate that, James, because I think that, we know that it's not one idea, one methodology, one entity that's going to really start accomplishing this. We need our developers, we need our advocates, we need our, affordable housing developers, we need our regional corrallers and SLOCOG. And we need them all to really ask these hard questions, something that nobody would say, Prop 13, here it is being talked about on a webinar. And I think that's really important. I think we really got to open up some of these hard, hard issues. Steve is talking about the cost of high density housing and all, we're trying to make more high density housing. These are really, really good discussions to have. So hats off to the League of Women Voters for having, some of these educational webinars, because, we really have a lot of work to do to continue to be informed and really start asking and talking about some of these really difficult issues in order to solve this housing crisis.
Thank you, Teresa. Scott.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for moderating, Shelley. You did a great job. And thanks to the league for putting together this series of webinars. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak. Something I'm very passionate about. I know everybody up here, all the people that work in Haslet, all the people who work in People's Self-Help, all of the service providers, working extremely hard every single day to help make improvements. And it's incremental. And I think that's something that is sometimes you don't recognize the impact that you're making because it is incremental, but it feels like there's a very important moment in time here where you have the county board of supervisors, both the prior one and the new board, that is really focused in on these issues like homelessness. You have the new RENA, you have SLOCOG's leadership. There's a lot of momentum, I would say, to moving beyond incrementalism and starting to make some big dents, including the investments made by the state in projects like HomeKey. So that's very exciting. And the more we scratch the surface, it's just not enough. So advocacy is incredibly important, both at your council levels, but also at the state and federal levels. The debt ceiling deal that was struck that averted economic disaster, part of that deal includes potential cuts to HUD, which means less vouchers, which means more people on the street here in San Luis Obispo. So we got to keep pushing back against that tide, and everybody needs to be involved if we want to see those outcomes we all desire. And just incredibly thankful to be a part of this.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
And Stephen.
Again, thank you to the league for putting this on. It's incredibly important, not just for social justice issues, but from an economic viability issue. I think we need to take that away. I think one of the transitional moments for me is when I read the EVC study from 10 years ago that talked about how precarious our businesses are relative to housing. Businesses go where employees go where housing goes. And so we need to keep that in our mind. And probably just finish with a quote that I've always cherished from Carlin Christensen. She said, we always seem to get the open space, we seem to get the parks, we just never get the housing. Let's start focusing on getting some housing. And so I think that's what we ought to do.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for staying past our 1 o'clock hour. I want to remind everybody that in a couple of days, this webinar will be uploaded on the League of Women's website. So if you missed any or part of it, you can tune back in. And I know that we will make the slideshows available via email. So once again, thank you all for your time, and we'll keep up the good fight on affordable housing. Take care.